Welcome to the Good and Basic Podcast, a long-form conversation between Joseph Bjork and this time Linda Bjork, who is my esteemed mother, who brings a very unique skill set that's going to be part of the centerpiece of the discussion today, and that is homeschooling. The general topics that we're going to be discussing today are responsibility, the role of education, the purpose of education, and how to do it right, possibly in multiple ways. We just barely did a podcast on her podcast, which is called Linda's Corner, where she has tackled issues such as battling depression, how to improve marriage, how to live joyfully, and generally bringing how would you describe your podcast?
My podcast is Faith, Family, and Living Joyfully. So I get to talk about things that matter to me.
Wonderful.
And there's just a wide variety of topics.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is really, really awesome. I enjoy that sort of thing because breadth is an important thing in addition to depth. And if you can do both at the same time and chase things that you're interested in things for reasons.
Right.
And there's this idea that is no longer very popular, that we have mission, and that your interests are not random, that they actually do guide you toward the things that you actually do need to be interested in order to bring out what you could be.
Right.
Yeah.
And my mission is to empower people to become their best selves.
Yeah.
So that's something that matters to me. And it doesn't really matter what level you start at or where your end is, just be the best you. And we have unique things to bring to the table, and that's awesome.
There's a moment in Kung Fu Panda. Kung Fu Panda 3 is not my favorite one in the series by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a moment in it which is beautiful. Po has been struggling as a Kung Fu instructor. He's terrible. He's absolutely terrible. He's calling out the moves that Tigress and the others have to do. So he's terrible as a Kung Fu instructor. He's calling out all the moves that Tigress and Monkey have to do, and he's calling them out at the worst possible timing so that Tigress gets whacked in the head with one of those swinging things that she trains with, and the monkey is running into trouble, and he's bad at it. But he has a breakthrough later on in the movie where he says, "I can't train you to be me. I could only train you to be you." And he trains the village of pandas to fight with Kung Fu by Kung Fu-izing things that they were already doing. And there's this idea that I really like, which is that the perfected, glorified, godlike version of yourself still resembles you.
Oh,
and it still retains your independent identity.
That means I don't have to be someone else in order to be perfect or acceptable or good enough or whatever.
And a lot of your own personal faults can become virtues if you dial them in right and put them in their appropriate place.
And there's more than one way to do things right. And as we're talking about education, I think that's part of the key is we're not going to say that this is the only way to do it or that's the only way to do it. It's how do we do this, or this to its best ability.
Yeah, and at the right time for the right student in the right way. And one of the advantages of homeschool is that it has that flexibility, but one of the things we discussed in your podcast is the pressure that many moms can feel that, if my neighbor homeschools and I don't, that means she's a good parent and I'm a terrible mother.
Right.
That
kind of feeling on both sides, or just the assumption, you think you're better because you're doing this, or it's like just relax. There's no competition. There's more than one way to do things right, and like you said, there's a timing issue.
Yeah. For me, homeschool was perfect. I really struggled in elementary school. As I said, I made it through kindergarten, and that's about as far as I got. But I was slow. I was just really, really slow. Whenever there were worksheets, I wouldn't finish them on time. I ended up staying in my desk past recess all the time, just daydreaming out the window and not really getting it and not really connecting with other students, and I spent a lot of time in my head. And you had the idea to try homeschool one time, and you shared the story in the podcast about how we did all my homework once and it took about 15 minutes to get through it all. And you thought, we could actually do this, and he wouldn't hate it, and it would be good for you, and it would be good for me, and it would be good for us all. So you tried it for a year, and it was good for me at that season. And then when I hit high school, I am so grateful that I went to the liberal arts high school that I went to. If I hadn't, this YouTube channel wouldn't exist, because that's where I met my good friend Joseph Fisher.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it was, again, not the answer for your entire education.
Kind of hard to do law school at home.
Yeah, I don't think they
Just
have
saying.
that. Yeah, I don't know how to do that.
No, on a scale of 1 to nope. I think they call that bar prep or something like that.
Oh, that's how we
Yeah,
got.
no.
Yeah,
Gross.
good stuff.
So what principles can we extract from that? If apparently you can do education for your children right, using the public education system, or do it right at home, or do it wrong at the public education system, or do it wrong at home, what is the principle? What is the secret sauce?
The secret sauce.
Yes, the secret ingredient.
Those secret sauce. I think there are a couple principles that we can extract from this, and I can't say that there is one specific answer. But some of the things we can pull from this, and we talked a little bit about this in the podcast that we did on Linda's Corner, and that is that parents can take a role in choosing what is the best fit for their child. And it can be the best fit for that stage even. And that's something that didn't really used to exist, where it was just, this is what you do, you send them to public school, there are no options, that's just the way it is. And the idea that now we have public school, and we have charter school options, and we have homeschool options.
And even private school options.
And private school options. So we can just open up the horizon a little bit and recognize that, okay, if this isn't a good fit, then let's see what is a good fit. So I think that some of the ideas of just having an open mind, I think is very helpful, of looking at the particular needs of that child rather than trying to shove them into a one-size-fits-all, I think is very important. And I also think that having the flexibility of even changing things from time to time.
Yeah, so that it's not even one size fits all. When you examine the child, you don't do it once and then say, okay, that was the right thing, okay, let's keep doing that plan forever. You keep your eyes
kids
open.
Grow.
Yeah.
They change.
Yeah.
And then you have to adapt.
Yeah.
And it's pretty constant. It's a constant challenge to try to figure out, what
is
a
best.
child needs at 5 is not what they need at 12, which is not what they need at 17 or whatever.
Yeah. I've wondered, I've had this kind of fantasy in my head that if any of my children are really struggling with delinquency, that I would, I'd have to work out how I do this in terms of employment. I need to make sure I have enough savings to pull this plan off. But I would love to just take the child who's struggling out into the mountains just one-on-one and say, okay, this is our life now. We're going to do homeschool Anasazi camp and just live in the woods and live simply and reset for a little bit until you're ready to reintegrate into society.
I'm sure that could be done.
Yeah, and it could be done well. I've heard of families doing that with, I heard of a Samoan family where the son was rambunctious, and so the dad took him and they lived on an island by themselves for a while.
Really?
Until he was able to
And did
get
it
his
just
act
the father
together.
and the son, or
Just
did
the
the whole
father and the
family
son.
come?
Just the father and the son.
Fascinating.
Isn't that amazing?
That is fascinating. I do have a good friend who struggled with lots of issues growing up, and he went on one of the Anasazi type camps, and it helped as a reset kind of a thing, and it was good for him.
Yeah.
It was good for him. Life-changing.
I think I know which friend you're talking about, and he's incredible.
He is.
He's a wonderful man.
He's amazing.
There is an idea in what you're saying, so being open to options, realizing that there's more than one way to do it, just being open to seeing what your options are, and being paying attention to the needs of the child so that you can fit the options that are out there to the present need.
Right.
So that's key. Pay attention.
Yes, and I think another important thing as a parent is to take yourself and your personal pride out of the picture.
Yeah.
And make sure that it's actually about the needs of the child and not the needs of my ego. Whether it be, my kid has to be the smartest or the best or the whatever, or I chose to do this, therefore my way is the best and the only way,
Or my child needs to be potty trained by 2 and play Mozart by 7, or...
Right.
Yeah. That kind of pressure is not healthy. It's good to push children to reach their potential, but not too much. And so there's a balance thing that requires you to take the ego out.
Mm-hmm.
That's a frustrating thing. One example that I find fascinating in history is a man named John Stuart Mill, who is a famous philosopher and a very competent man. And the story of his education is both inspiring and creepy.
Oh, dear.
At the same time. Because
Okay.
his father, James Mill, was good friends with a philosopher, and they decided to create the ultimate philosophical weapon using his son.
Oh.
They decided to train him in Greek and Latin and rhetoric and philosophy, and train him to be the spokesperson for their particular philosophy. So they already knew what philosophy he would be preaching when he got older.
Okay.
And they knew that they wanted him to be powerful in rhetoric and essays and speaking, and they wanted him to be erudite and impressive intellectually, and so they pushed him hard. And his father would do, this little boy was reading Greek by the time he was 5, tutoring his sister in Greek by the time he was 8, spoke Latin very early on, and his father, to his credit, is doing all this homeschool himself as a single dad.
Oh.
And at the same time writing a however many volumes history of the British Empire in India. Like, you can't say that he wasn't a go-getter. I just think he was going and getting the wrong thing. And it caused a horrible mental breakdown for this poor kid when he was in his early 20s, where he just shut down. And interestingly, became a massive writer for freedom. This is something he wrote quite a bit about. Freedom of speech is an issue that he's famous for, and equality for women is something he also wrote about. So he wrote about the things his parents wanted him to, but also, I mean, he got that spark of freedom from having been pushed too hard himself.
And that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Because as parents, we want what's best for our kids. We want them to succeed.
And we think we know what's best.
We do. And usually we know some things.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the problem is when you assume you know everything.
Yeah. And that's a thorny problem, because you do know better most of the time, but not all of the time. And so there's that constant struggle of how do you know the limits of your own knowledge. It's a real problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it requires kind of humility. And again, exactly what you're saying, being open and paying attention, like that is the key. If you're ever closed to that, then you stay blind. But if you're open to it, and open even to criticism or even revising your own plan, that's beautiful. It's a good thing.
So
That was the thing that we mentioned in the podcast, if I might throw that in, is that even in homeschooling, in the process that you took, that there was a lot of iteration. Year 1 was not the same as year 2 was not the same as year 3, and it took a number of years to dial it in to a system that worked well for you and your children.
right. And even
Given the personalities of certain children.
Exactly, and even working as you aged and moved on, and then other children, it still had to change and adapt a little bit to be able to fit the needs of the kids, of the individuals as they went along.
The amount of structure that my sister Sarah needed was not the same amount of structure that certain other individuals who I won't name needed.
Yeah.
I needed just a little bit more pushing, because otherwise the homework just didn't get done. And it was good. It was good. We found the level that was the appropriate level of push to help me achieve some of my potential.
And it took some trial and error,
Yeah.
as you mentioned. That's very true.
Try and try again.
Going back to the question that we talked a little bit about before and the example that you gave, I was thinking about keeping the end in mind.
Yes.
That beginning with the end in mind.
What is the education
and
for?
they, in the example, they very much began with the end in mind, but the child was not on board with that goal. So I'm wondering, maybe you can come up with some ideas of how do you come up with a balance of what is the end in mind that is a reasonable expectation for the child. I think on a very basic level, my objective is I would like all of my children to be happy, healthy, productive citizens who are law-abiding. I mean, let's just at the
Functional.
basic,
Let's let them human well.
Yeah, yes, let's human well. So that's, I think that's a reasonable expectation for
And we don't
across the
necessarily
board.
all have to be basketball players or doctors or some specific
Or
mold.
lawyers, or
Yeah,
whatever.
well, that's not for everybody.
No.
Not even for me all the time. There's an interesting thing, and I think it might relate. I want to toss an idea in and just see what sticks. Socrates is really interesting to me because he was a teacher, and he taught with questions. And if you look at his students, or the people who claimed to be his students who then wrote, they had wildly different philosophies. And so you'd imagine you go to a philosophy teacher, you learn his philosophy, and then you go and spread it. And you're like the carbon copy of the first teacher.
Oh, that's lame.
Yeah, right? Gross. But with Socrates, that's not actually what happened. The philosophies that came from him included Platonism, Cynicism, certain branches of Sophism, of all things, and then just this wide, spread out type of philosophy. And then, his grandchildren, grand students, I guess you'd call them, included Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle didn't agree, but Aristotle did consider Plato his mentor, and Plato was not the same as Socrates, but he considered him his mentor. So whatever education Socrates was using did not focus on a particular desired result. It was about something else. And he described himself as a midwife of ideas. He said, I'm not thinking for you, but this is going to hurt. I'm going to help you through this, help you through your thinking. Do you think that ties in? Like there's some process-oriented thing instead of a goal-oriented thing? Or what do you think?
Well, let's see. So when you're thinking about a goal, his goal would not be to have someone parrot his beliefs, but would it be to think and to question and to ask? I mean, it seems like there was a goal in mind.
Yeah.
And allowing that process, I think, is part of it.
Yeah. And I'm having a little bit of trouble formulating this because the thinking that he wants them to do has to be independent. He can't do it for them. That's why he likes the analogy of the midwife, is the midwife is not the one giving birth.
It's actually a really good analogy. Another analogy that's often used in education is there's a different approach between the teacher or the mentor is like a little teapot filling little teacups versus the idea of you're a candle and you're lighting the next candles. So in the example that you gave, he was very much lighting their own candles so that they could shine their own particular light. And I think that type of education is much more beneficial for the individual and for the society in general than the idea of just filling that teacup and trying to just create little
Carbon copies.
Because as a carbon copy, if you make a copy and then they make a copy of that copy, the quality goes down.
It does.
Very naturally, and that's just the way that it goes. But if there is a candle and you're lighting another candle, it can burn just as brightly.
Yeah. Yeah. It really can, and it can spread amazingly.
Yeah.
There is an idea that I have kind of embroiled in this. I mean, certain types of knowledge are fairly easy to pass on cup style. I mean, if it's just regurgitate this information is fairly easy to pass that way. Other things are not. For instance, character or virtues, which revolve around the choice of the individual. I cannot choose for someone else to be good. I can lead them by example, I can instruct them, I can correct them, I can inspire them, but I can't do the thing for them. I'm powerless. There's a wall there. So you can't choose for a student. It's not a thing that is in your power to do. And if humans are choosing things, then the education that is going to draw out, the word education means to draw out. It's from the same root as the word ductile for metal. When you're drawing out the potential, like pulling something out that doesn't quite want to come, but it's already in there.
Boy, that goes with the birth analogy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Interesting.
Squish and...
I haven't thought of that. Okay.
Yeah. If what a person is a choosing thing, and if you cannot choose for someone else and still have it be their choice, then education gets a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of what we associate with good mentors, which is the inspiring role and the example role and the correction role. I mean, that's not passing information. It's encouraging your choices to be what they can and should be. But it still needs to be your choice.
That includes allowing choices.
Yeah.
And that is a challenging thing. And choices can be small and simple, but just the opportunity to make choices helps develop that ability.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the things that we did in our little homeschool thing to allow a little bit of choice was creating freedom within a structure.
Yes.
So that there was that feeling of, I can choose to do this today, or I can choose to do this. Eventually I'll have to get it all done, but just even though it was a small choice, it gives that freedom and that practice so that when you have bigger choices, then you have something to build on.
Right, right. And the scope of that freedom can increase over time.
Right, right.
So it could start out with the toddler deciding red shirt or blue shirt.
Exactly.
Which has massively consequences if you're a Trekkie. But other than that, it doesn't matter so much.
Don't put on a red shirt.
Don't put on a red shirt. Don't put on a red shirt. But, as you get a little older, it's, am I going to do my math homework or my spelling homework today? And later on, it's, what do I want to do today? Go for it.
Ooh, and when it's wide open that way, people who haven't had a lot of experience making choices often get lost.
Yeah, paralyzed.
Yeah, where there's too much. I have a friend who said she prefers shopping at Costco because there aren't as many choices.
Really? She said that?
She says when you go to get apples, it's like red apples and green apples. You don't have to choose between the Gala and the Delicious and the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Or, you don't choose between brands of peanut butter. Just pick one. That's all there is. And she says it just makes it easier. It's been interesting. There have been studies done where that idea of when we have too many choices, we don't make a choice.
Paralysis.
At all.
They call that information toxicity in some domains, where if you have too much information, it paralyzes your ability to sort out what's relevant, what's not, and your ability to make choices goes down significantly. And so I think you need to develop an immunity to arcane powder when it comes to information and freedom. You need to work up the doses. Build up your responsibility a little bit at a time. Try this much freedom, and then this much, and this much, and eventually you can just open it all the way.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
not on day one.
No, it doesn't work out very well. That's an excellent analogy.
Build your immunity to arcane freedom to freedom. Build your immunity to freedom. That should be a t-shirt.
Yeah. No one's going to get it, but...
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah. There's an interesting role there, particularly in a parent, because as a parent, you're paying attention to the different options and you want to teach your children well. And I am deeply grateful for the amount of interest that you took in my education. Again, this is something that we talked about on the podcast. But, part of that role in taking an interest in the education, whether you do that through, elementary school and you're just paying attention and helping with the homework, or if you're doing a homeschool, or, choosing the perfect charter school, there's that controlling of boundaries and opening up boundaries over time. Can you speak to that process? Like, how do you do that well? Opening up that freedom gate. And kind of managing the boundaries.
Are we talking as a role of a parent? I got a little bit lost as we were talking about this, and then we were talking about these school choices, and then I wasn't sure where the question matched the little example that we were starting with.
I think I was asking two different questions.
Okay.
So I see a role in the teacher, and particularly in the role of the parent, to have boundaries and to use boundaries as a teaching tool, and also to increase the size of those boundaries over time, to increase that scope of freedom. And I wonder if you have some insights on how to do that well.
Brilliant insight on how to build that immunity to iocane powder.
Yes, in somebody else, like push the child out the door appropriately.
Push the child out the door. I wish that there was a one-size-fits-all, this is the answer.
I'm taking notes. I have kids now.
And once you've got this, then all of a sudden all of your problems are solved. But I think it's, again, an individual matter, because each child is a little bit different with what their needs. You talked about some of your basic structure needs and requirements were different from that of your sister.
Yeah.
So I can't say that there was one thing that would work best for both of you. So for you, trying to have some freedom within limits was very helpful. And then allowing you, in particular, you desired the freedom to fail.
We had a lot of conversations about that, particularly when I was a teenager.
Yes, we did. As a parent, it was frustrating because it felt like your measurement for that is I must fail, because
in order
failure
to have had the freedom
means that
yeah.
I have freedom. So it was challenging as a parent to try to say, yes, I want you to have the freedom to fail, but I also don't want you to be failing all the time as proof that you are free.
Right.
Because the final goal and objective is not failure, it is success.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there's one way to do it that is going to be the right answer. But I do think freedom to fail is important.
Yeah.
And as a parent, that's hard to let go of that. And part of it is I want you to succeed. And part of it is also personal pride. That's, it's
My
like,
child's not gonna be a
my
failure.
child's not going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a little bit of relax, let go, and allow, and then to allow consequences.
Including failure.
Including failure.
Yeah.
And failure has consequences.
I'm incredibly grateful that out of all of those discussions, you made a conscious effort to, particularly I think this is mostly applicable when I was like 17, 18, when I was starting to go to college, and having that space where my grades were mine, my homework was mine, and if I failed it was entirely on my own head, and at that point you were far less involved than you had been in the previous phase. And I remember that was a hard thing.
And
I had a lot of
it took
conversations.
a conscious effort for me to let go. Like you would sleep in and not go make it to class. And as a parent, I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, he's a college student. Get out of bed.
He's going to be
Go,
the governor.
go. And then just to say, okay, it's
Yeah.
his, it's yours, it's yours, it's yours, it's yours, it's yours, it's yours. And that process was challenging.
Yeah. Thank you, by the
So-
way. There's an idea there that I've had, that if humaning well is about making choices, like what a human is fundamentally is a choosing thing, then there's two levels to this. If you dial in humaning well, it's going to be choosing well. And there's two parts to that. Choosing and choosing well. And so the first phase of that is knowing that you have freedom, and you do not have freedom until you can say no, until you can not succeed, until it's in question. If there's nothing risked, nothing gained, if there's not any question about it, then it wasn't a choice. It was just what happened. But once you get through that first phase of, am I able to choose? Is this really free? Could it go both ways? Is it in question? At that point, you're only halfway there. Humaning well actually does mean choosing well, once the choice is your own.
And I think the role of a parent that's very important in this process is allowing the consequences.
Yeah.
Because while you're choosing and you're not choosing well, and hopefully it's in something small, if the parent then steps in and fixes everything, then that choice was fine. And I will do it again.
Because the consequences did not matter.
There weren't any,
Yeah.
because mom stepped in or
If
dad
I choose
stepped
A
in.
and choose B and both of them end to the same place, it does not matter which one I choose.
Right. So this is not an educational thing. I guess all of life is an education, but I have a friend whose son made some very not good choices and got in trouble with the law.
Okay.
Young, and it was not jail time, but it was community service. Awesome. Let's have some consequences. The parents did the community service while
Oh,
the child sat on the porch and watched. And I thought, oh, this is not good. And their response was, oh, it wasn't fair, he was unfairly judged, and da-da-da-da, made excuses, and then stepped in and eliminated the consequences. And so the child continued down that path until the consequences were jail time and other issues. And it hurts my heart because I could see that could have been done differently. I mean, the child chooses what the child is going to choose, but then the parent's response to allow the consequences and to support the child rather than eliminating the consequences to support the child.
Yeah.
So
There's an old Greek expression, patemata matemata, which kind of sounds like Hakuna Matata.
yeah.
Except patemata matemata means let pain guide thy learning,
Oh.
which is very different from Hakuna Matata.
Yeah, that is very different.
Yeah, what a wonderful phrase. It means if you suffer, it's your own dang fault and you can learn from it.
Oh, you
Yeah,
can. We
you
can
can.
learn from our
You can
mistakes.
gain.
It's
a
not a
beautiful thing.
guarantee, but it is an opportunity.
I like that. I like that. If pain is at least an opportunity, then it's not entirely wasted.
Still not very fun.
No, it's pain.
No, but I guess if we do it right, then we learn to avoid the things that cause us pain whenever possible.
Yeah.
Some things happen and there's nothing you can do about it, but there are a lot of things where our actions, our choosing well, creates a better life.
Yeah, a more comfortable life, a less pain-filled life, both on a physical level, but also on an emotional, spiritual, mental
sure.
level. I mean, having some savings in the bank, even just a month's rent, gives you an extra month of mental security that you don't have to be panicked and worried. And so that's a thing worth fighting for and choosing into, just for the sake of avoiding some pain.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a lot here with this idea of education. I like the themes of personal responsibility that come out of it, and it is such a fundamental, good and basic thing. There's not many things more fundamental than education, and I want to say on the record, thank you for taking such an interest in my education.
You are welcome.
And even in moments like the freedom to fail discussion when I was 17, the constant there is that I knew that you cared. And that's why you cared about the consequences. And then you cared even more than that to allow the consequences. That is a beautiful thing. Thank you.
Oh, you are welcome.
If you'd like to check out the podcast where we talked more about the specific history of how Mom got into homeschooling, how that went, some of the process of dialing that in, and some more about some of the specifics, then please go check out the podcast down at Linda's Corner, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Also, please leave a comment below about education. This is a discussion worth having. What has worked for you? Have you had experiences as a teacher? Have you had experiences as a student? Have you tried multiple forms of education? Let's talk about this thing down in the comments below. Thank you.